Hi, friends. Tonight, I invite you to settle in beneath your blankets and breathe deeply as we drift far away from the hum and glow of your modern lamps. Together, we shall slip through the veil of time and step quietly into the sooty streets and dim-lit parlors of the Industrial Revolution. This is not a tale of kings or grand battles, but of something far humbler, yet deeply human. The way ordinary folk kept themselves clean, or tried to, amid the whir of steam engines and the thick fog of coal smoke. Perhaps you have pictured the industrial age as a realm of clanking metal and top hats, swirling factory chimneys, and children scampering down narrow alleys. You would not be wrong. Yet beneath the iron skeletons of new machines and the gas-lit boulevards, real people rose each day with grime beneath their fingernails, sweat on their brows, and often very few ways to wash it all away. Tonight's tale is spun from the everyday details that history books so often brush aside. The coarse towels, the greasy soaps, the wooden washstands tucked into drafty bedrooms. Over 20 nights, we shall explore where and how people bathed, the secrets they kept in chipped enamel basins, the odors they masked with lavender sachets, the lice that scurried beneath starched collars. But worry not, we shall tread softly. This is not a horror of filth to make your stomach churn, but rather a gentle unveiling of lives lived bravely in the constant battle against soot and sweat. By candlelight and dawn's first haze, our characters, washerwomen, factory hands, chimney sweeps, and dainty ladies alike, shall teach us what it meant to be clean when water was scarce, soap was dear, and privacy was a luxury reserved for the few. Let us begin with a simple image. Imagine, if you will, a narrow street in Manchester, sometime around the 1840s. A coal cart rattles over cobblestones slick with last night's rain. The air is heavy, smelling faintly of horse dung and fresh bread from a nearby bakehouse. Amid the rattle of wheels and the hiss of steam, a young girl named Eliza peers out from her family's lodging house. She has never known a proper bathhouse. Her mother, Mary, keeps a battered tin tub beneath the stairs. Once a week, if there is enough hot water and enough coal to spare, the family will fill that tub with water boiled over a smoky hearth. Mary will scrub Eliza's tangled hair with rough soap made from animal fat and lye. The water will quickly darken with soot from Eliza's stockinged feet. There is no fresh towel for each child. Instead, a single linen cloth is shared, washed rarely, dried by the hearth. When the last child steps out of the tepid bathwater, the tub is drained into the gutter, and so the ritual ends for another week. For Eliza's father, Thomas, who labors in the iron foundry, there is little time for bathing at all. His workday stretches from before dawn until the stars prick the evening sky. He wipes sweat from his neck with a rag that hangs by the furnace door. His hands are blackened by soot and grease that soap can barely touch. The smell clings to him, a mix of coal dust, sweat, and iron filings. Yet Thomas is no more foul than any other working man on his street. A certain musk is simply part of life here, a badge of honest toil. Perfume is for the wealthy, who carry pomanders of lavender and rosewater to mask the city's stench. For Thomas, a quick rinse of face and hands in a basin before supper must suffice. Do not think these families lacked pride in their appearance. Quite the contrary. There was a quiet dignity in the Sunday scrub, when children were lined up to have their hair combed and ears wiped clean before church. It was a ritual that spoke of hope, respectability, and the desire to stand before one's neighbors with at least the illusion of cleanliness. As you drift deeper into this story, you may wonder how soap was made, why clean water was so precious, and who could afford to wash more than once a week. You may imagine the cramped backyards where women hunched over steaming wash tubs, or the public bathhouses that emerged as cities grew too crowded for private washing to suffice. We shall visit these places in time, each scene unfolding like the pages of an old diary, fragile and faint with age. For now, I invite you to listen to the hum of the street outside Eliza's window. The morning is waking, the chimneys coughing out fresh plumes of coal smoke. Somewhere, a factory whistle screams its shrill summons, calling Thomas from his half-eaten bread. Mary wipes her hands on her apron, already thinking of the water she must haul from the pump, the fire she must coax to life, the lye soap she must ration carefully so there is enough to scrub the family's underclothes. Outside, neighbors nod to one another, their faces smudged with the same coal dust that blackens the curtains and settles on the breakfast table. They do not dream of the warm showers or scented shampoos you know so well. They dream instead of a world where water might run clear from a tap inside their own wall, where soap might come cheap, where they might wash away the day's labor with ease. This is where our journey begins. Among the tin tubs, the ragged towels, the patient hands that scrub and rinse and wring out what little comfort they can from the simplest of luxuries, warm water and plain soap. So rest easy now, dear friends. The soot and soap of yesteryear shall not soil your dreams tonight. Instead, they will cradle you in the soft knowledge that every era carries its quiet battles, its simple triumphs. Tomorrow we shall step deeper into the wash houses and alleyways, the steaming laundries and perfumed parlors to see what it truly meant to stay clean in an age that was anything but. Until then, sleep well. The story waits for you. When dawn's first thin light spills across the rooftops of Birmingham, a small figure moves among barrels and vats in a dim back room behind a modest shopfront. This is where Samuel Whitcomb, a local soap maker, plies his trade, a man whose livelihood depends upon coaxing something pure and cleansing from a world smudged with grease and coal dust. Samuel's workshop is humble, yet surprisingly fragrant, though not in the way of sweet flowers. The air here carries a sharp, fatty tang that clings to the walls and seeps into the fibers of his coat. Tallow, lye, scraps of animal fat bought cheap from the butcher, blocks of coarse soda ash, these are the tools of his trade, and they are stacked in every corner. In the early hours, before the city's factories roar to life, Samuel pours water into a battered iron cauldron. He adds handfuls of caustic soda, stirring slowly with a long wooden paddle. There is danger here. Too much lye and the soap will burn skin raw. Too little and it will be too soft, dissolving away before it can chase a single smudge of grime. He learned the craft from his father, who learned it from his own, back when soap was more precious than fine cloth. In those days, a cake of good soap was a gift to be hoarded and cut in careful slivers. But the industrial age has changed that. There are more people now, more bodies pressed together in crowded tenements, more factories spewing filth across clothes and skin. Samuel's soap is no longer a luxury alone, but a necessity, an armor against the creeping diseases that flourish in unwashed quarters. He tips in the tallow, lumps of fat rendered down from cattle and sheep, bought cheap from the slaughterhouses that dot the outskirts of town. The fat bubbles as it melts, swirling into the lye water with a hiss that fogs the single glass pane above his workbench. The smell thickens. He hums to himself, steadying his hand as he adds a trickle of brine to harden the mixture. Outside, the street is waking. A milk cart rattles by, the driver snapping his whip at a stubborn horse. Down the lane, the baker's boy sweeps yesterday's ash from the hearth, his apron already gray with soot. A maid passes by with a basket of soiled linen, eyeing Samuel's shopfront as she hurries to the public washhouse. She knows his soap. Coarse, yellowish cakes wrapped in cheap brown paper, is strong enough to lift the worst stains from her master's collars. Samuel wipes sweat from his brow with the back of his sleeve. His hands are red and chapped from years of stirring lye and brine, his nails always lined with flecks of soda ash that no washing can quite remove. He does not mind. He takes a certain pride in the burn of the soap's bite, proof that it does its work well. His wife, Margaret, appears in the doorway carrying a pail of fresh water. She says nothing, but her eyes flick to the bubbling cauldron. He nods. She knows when to hand him more salt or when to open the shutters to release the sharp, greasy steam that curls toward the ceiling. They work like this in quiet accord, a husband and wife bound by a trade that is both humble and vital. When the soap thickens to Samuel's liking, he pours it into wooden molds lined with rough muslin. He will leave it to cure for days in the cool back room. Later, when the blocks are firm, he will slice them into smaller bars with a wire strung taut between two wooden handles. Margaret will wrap each bar and stack them neatly on the shop's narrow shelves. Children sometimes peer in through the smeared glass window, noses pressed flat as they watch him work. They do not always understand what the soap does, not truly. For them, it is a thing to be avoided when they can, a scratchy ritual that means cold water, and their mother's hard hands scrubbing behind their ears. Yet the city needs Samuel's craft. Without him and others like him, the grime would gather unchecked in every corner, and sickness would creep through the streets more cruelly than it already does. Cholera, typhoid, the dreaded fever. These enemies lurk in filth and stagnant water, carried by hands that never see a bar of soap. As the morning lengthens, Samuel steps outside to sweep the front step clean. He watches a factory worker trudge past, his collar blackened from the forge. The man raises a hand in greeting. Samuel nods in return, though they will likely never speak more than a word or two. In some ways, their work is the same, each laboring to keep the city alive in their own way, each bearing the scars of toil upon their skin. By midday, the first customers appear. A maid in a patched shawl clutching a few coins, a laundress who buys the trimmings and soap scraps by weight to stretch her earnings. Samuel greets them all with the same soft voice, careful not to cheat or short a measure. Reputation is worth more than coin in these narrow streets, and he knows that if his soap does not wash well, word will spread faster than the smoke that curls from the factory stacks. In a small box beneath the counter, Samuel keeps a few precious cakes of scented soap, rosewater, lavender, sometimes lemon peel when he can afford it. These are not for the laundress or the chimney sweep, but for the occasional gentlewoman who steps lightly into his shop, a glove pressed to her nose against the lingering smell of tallow. She will lift the soap to her nose, inhale its soft perfume, and buy a piece to keep among her linens, where its scent masks the damp smell of the city creeping in through the cracks. When the day is done and the molds are set to rest, Samuel scrubs his hands at the pump behind the workshop. The irony never escapes him. The soap maker's hands are never truly clean. Yet he feels a quiet pride as he watches the runoff swirl down the drain, carrying away the day's labor. Tomorrow, more barrels of fat, more lye, more salt. Another batch to carve and cure, to send out into a city that has no choice but to fight its filth one bar at a time. Tonight, as the lamps flicker and the soot settles on rooftops like a thin black snow, Samuel and Margaret sit side by the hearth. She mends a tear in his shirt, and he rubs his cracked knuckles, thinking of the work waiting in the morning. In this small, fragrant corner of the city, cleanliness is a fragile promise. But for now, in this gentle hush before sleep, it is enough. In the heart of London's teeming boroughs, where brick chimneys stab the sky and narrow streets coil between rows of tenements, the communal washhouse stands like a weary guardian of modest cleanliness. It is a squat building of soot-darkened brick and fogged glass windows, its walls echoing with the hum of water, the scrape of brushes, and the steady murmur of women's voices weaving secrets into steam. Few who pass by give the washhouse much thought. To the men hurrying off to factories or returning from taverns, it is merely another building among many. But for the women who cross its threshold with baskets of soiled linen balanced on their hips, it is both burden and sanctuary. A place where the week's grime is wrestled from cloth and flesh alike, and where whispers travel faster than soap bubbles down the drains. Eleanor Hughes arrives just as dawn preys apart the darkness. She is young, but her hands already bear the raw red knuckles of endless scrubbing. With her comes a burlap sack of shirts, underthings, and bed linen steeped in the odors of coal smoke and sweat. She pays her penny fee at the entrance, nods to Mrs. Abbott, the caretaker, and finds an empty corner where the steam drifts thickest. Inside, rows of tin wash tubs line the cracked stone floor. Water drips from pipes overhead, fed by a great iron boiler that rattles and hisses with the labor of keeping dozens of tubs warm. The air is heavy, damp, and sour with the scent of wet fabric and lye. Light filters in through grimy windows, catching on motes of lint that swirl like soft snowflakes in the warmth. Eleanor rolls up her sleeves and plunges her hands into the hot water. Her mother once told her that a woman's worth could be measured by the whiteness of her linens. A cruel lesson, perhaps, but one that clings to Eleanor each time she kneels beside a wash tub. She soaps a shirt collar, working the stiff fabric between her fingers until the water clouds with filth. Beside her, Mrs. Dawes, a widow with 3 children, beats a pair of trousers against a ribbed washboard, each slap echoing off the stone walls like a drum beat. They talk in low voices, their words half lost in the hiss of the boiler. They speak of husbands who drink too deep, of children who cough in their sleep, of neighbors who watch too closely, and of neighbors who watch too little. The washhouse is as much a place of secrets as it is of soap. Here, a woman might confess what she cannot at home, might cry behind a curtain of steam where no one can see the tears slip into the rinse water. By midday, the air is so thick that beads of moisture drip from the ceiling. Eleanor wrings out a petticoat and pins it to a sagging line that stretches across the room. Beneath it, other women haul fresh buckets from the boiler, careful not to splash the scalding water on bare feet. Children too small to be left alone at home sleep curled in corners, wrapped in coats that smell faintly of home-cooked broth and coal dust. The caretaker, Mrs. Abbott, makes her rounds with a watchful eye. She is fierce about the rules. No wasting water, no brawling over tubs, no idling when the queue at the door grows restless. Some mutter that she was once a scullery maid for a grand house and carries her old mistress's iron ways in her bones. But they respect her all the same, for she keeps the peace in this warm, steamy haven where tempers can flare as quickly as soap can slip from a careless hand. Not all who come are poor. Now and then a maid from a wealthier household appears, sent by her mistress to scrub away the weak stains far from the tiled kitchens of the grander neighborhoods. These girls arrive with baskets of finer cloth, linen trimmed with lace, chemises soft as milk. They draw quick glances from the other women, who note each delicate piece with a mix of envy and disdain. Yet here, amid the clang of buckets and the hiss of steam, all stand equal before the washtub. Eleanor rubs her palms against her apron, pausing to catch her breath. She thinks of her own small room, the cold hearth, the single cracked basin where she washes her face each morning. Here, at least, there is enough warm water to chase the soot from her knuckles and the salt from her skin. She dips her arms elbow-deep into the washtub, feeling the ache ease just slightly in the forgiving heat. As the afternoon shadows lengthen, a hush falls. The chatter slows to murmurs. Outside, the city rumbles on. Carts clatter over cobblestones, factory whistles blow, the endless hiss of steam engines threads through the air. But within the washhouse, the only sounds are the steady slap of wet cloth, the squeak of a brush against a stained cuff, the weary sighs of women who have scrubbed away not only the dirt, but the thin veil between themselves and their secrets. At closing time, Mrs. Abbott clangs an old iron bell, the sound harsh yet oddly comforting in its finality. Eleanor gathers her damp bundle of clean clothes, tying the sack tight so that precious warmth does not escape too soon into the chill outside. She nods to Mrs. Dawes, who lifts a hand in silent farewell, her own shoulders bent beneath the weight of tomorrow's burdens. Stepping out into the narrow lane, Eleanor inhales the night air. It is sharp with the scent of coal fires and horse droppings, but beneath it clings the faintest whisper of soap. A small victory she carries home like a charm. Tomorrow the grime will gather again, of course. Shirts will yellow at the collars, skirts will brush against muddy streets. But for tonight, she will slip between sheets that are almost white, pull a clean pillow beneath her tired head, and drift into dreams made softer by the work done in the hush and heat of the washhouse. And so, within these walls of brick and steam, the city's women hold fast to something that slips so easily through coal-choked air. The fragile promise that for a few hours at least, they and their families might lie down to sleep smelling not of soot and sweat, but of simple, precious soap. In a cramped attic above a bustling inn near the docks of Liverpool, young Thomas Clegg sits cross-legged on the wooden floor, tugging at the stiff buttons of his soot-caked shirt. He is 10 years old, though small enough to be mistaken for 6, his shoulders sharp beneath skin the color of ash. Around him, the low ceiling slopes so severely that Thomas must duck his head whenever he stands. This attic is not his home, but it is the closest thing to one. Mr. Hargreaves, the master sweep, rents the room for his apprentices, a half-dozen boys who slip through the narrow flues and blackened chimneys of the city's crowded houses. Thomas is one of these sweeps, his days spent crawling through soot-clogged passageways, scrubbing at brick and creosote until his palms blister and his knees bruise raw. Tonight, the boys are gathered for their weekly bath, if such a ritual can be called that. In the far corner of the attic sits a battered copper tub, dented and green with age. A single bucket of warm water steams gently, hauled up the narrow stair by Mr. Hargreaves' wife, who spares them only the smallest measure of kindness. Beside the tub rests a bar of harsh soap, coarse and gritty as sand. The first boy strips quickly, teeth chattering as he lowers himself into the shallow water. He splashes a handful over his face and neck, wincing as soap bites into the raw places behind his ears. Thomas waits his turn, shivering as he picks flakes of soot from beneath his fingernails. He watches the water darken with each boy who bathes, the surface rippling with floating flecks of ash and chimney grit. By the time it is his turn, the water is barely warm and hardly clean. Yet Thomas does not complain. He clambers in, knees tucked to his chest, and scoops handfuls of water over his head. It runs in thin black rivulets down his chest and arms. The soap stings the small cuts on his elbows, the scrapes across his shins. He scrubs harder, hoping to chase the last of the soot from his scalp before the cold air claims what little heat the water holds. In the corner, Mr. Hargreaves sits on a three-legged stool, his boots propped against the wall. He watches the boys with an eye more for discipline than care. Shoulders straight, no dawdling, no horseplay. Time is coal, and coal is money. The sooner the boys are washed and sleeping, the sooner they can be shaken awake before dawn to clamber up another flue. When Thomas climbs from the tub, goose flesh prickling along his arms, he dries himself with a ragged scrap of linen that smells faintly of lye. There is no fresh shirt waiting, only the same grimy one he wore yesterday, brushed clean with stiff fingers. He shrugs into it, the fabric rough against his newly scrubbed skin. Beside him, Peter, another sweep scarcely older than Thomas, scratches at the angry rash spreading across his shoulders. The soot burrows deep into their pores, clings beneath their fingernails, gathers in the creases of their eyelids, no matter how fiercely they scrub. Each boy carries the chimney's darkness with him, a stubborn reminder that water and soap can only do so much. When the last boy finishes, Mr. Hargreaves tips the tub out the attic window, sending a dark splash into the narrow alley below. The copper basin rattles as it hits the floorboards once more, ready to wait another week for its next meager duty. The boys curl up on straw pallets, the chill of the attic creeping through thin blankets patched with old flour sacks. Thomas lies awake for a while, eyes tracing the beams overhead. He imagines a warm bath, deep enough to cover him to the chin, with water so clean he could see his toes beneath the surface. He has heard whispers of grand houses where gentlemen's children splash in porcelain tubs, servants standing by with fluffy towels and scented soap that smells of rose or lemon. But here in the attic, there is only the faint scent of coal dust drifting up from the street below, and the itch of grit still caught in the whorls of his skin. He scratches at his neck, then folds his hands beneath his cheek, pulling his knees tight to hold in what warmth he can. In his dreams, the chimney flues twist into tunnels of white marble. He crawls through them on clean hands and knees, emerging not into soot-blackened parlors, but into gardens where rain washes him clean and sun warms his bones. Yet even these dreams grow hazy as sleep drags him under, soot clinging to his thoughts like it clings to his skin. Below, the innkeeper bars the door for the night, and the streets outside echo with the clatter of late carts and the distant call of a night watchman. Within the attic's thin walls, the sweeps shift in restless sleep, their bodies carrying the city's filth into tomorrow's dawn. When morning comes, Thomas will wake to Mr. Hargreaves' barked command, and the cycle will begin anew. He will shoulder his brushes, tie a rag over his mouth to keep from choking on chimney grit, and climb again into narrow passageways where darkness presses so close it steals the breath from his lungs. Yet somewhere deep within, beneath the layers of soot and sorrow, a small flicker of pride remains. For though the city rises on the backs of its machines and the smoke of its chimneys, it is boys like Thomas who keep its hearths warm and its drawing rooms bright. The bath, however brief and bitter, is his reminder that beneath the soot, he is still a child. Still flesh and bone, and deserving, however faintly, of warmth and water. Tonight, that is enough. He sleeps, the last droplets of bathwater drying on his skin, carrying the quiet hope that one day the soot might loosen its hold, and clean skin might greet the dawn without fear of the next flue to crawl through. For now, in the hush of the attic above the inn, The chimney sweeps dream of warmth, soap, and sky. In a tall, narrow townhouse on the genteel edge of Bath, Lady Henrietta Fairley stands before her looking-glass as the morning sun struggles through gauzy curtains. The faint light catches on silver hairbrushes and tiny glass vials lined neatly upon her dressing table. Small treasures that whisper of refinement, even as the city's smoky breath curls beneath her shutters. Henrietta is 34, the wife of a prosperous solicitor whose name carries weight enough to keep coal dust at bay. Or so they tell themselves. She lifts her chin as her lady's maid, Martha, teases pins from her hair and lays them in a small dish of mother-of-pearl. The ritual is daily, but always the same. Hair to be brushed until it gleams, skin to be powdered until every hint of oil or sweat is safely hidden beneath a veil of lavender and rice starch. In this house, bathing is an affair to be spoken of delicately, if at all. The Fairleys own a bathing tub of polished tin, carried up from the scullery and placed before the fireplace on rare occasions. Perhaps once a month in winter, a bit more in summer's sticky breath. When the tub appears, it is Martha who hauls the buckets up 3 flights of stairs, careful not to slosh water onto the stair runner Henrietta guards so jealously. But today there will be no full bath, only the daily toilette. Martha brings a basin of water, only just warmed, and sets it at Henrietta's feet. The gentlewoman dips a linen cloth, dabs at her face and neck, careful not to dampen her lace collar. Her underarms she cleans with another cloth scented faintly of rosemary water. The rest must wait. She will change her linen shift instead, fresh from the airing cupboard, pressed stiff and sweet with sprigs of dried lavender stitched into tiny muslin sachets. Henrietta knows well that beneath silk gowns and polished boots, all the city's ladies hide the same troubles as the scullery maids. The stale sweat that clings to corset stays, the faint sourness that gathers behind the knees after hours in stiff petticoats. The difference is simply how well one masks it. In powder, in perfume, in layers of linen that soak up what cannot be rinsed away daily. Once, as a girl, she visited the ancient baths that gave this city its name. She remembers the marble columns, the great pool steaming in the chill spring air, the voices of Roman statues frozen in their silent watch. She wondered then why her own mother would never bathe so boldly, never slip beneath those public waters. "A lady," her mother whispered, "keeps her ablutions private." The notion stuck, and so the ritual remains hidden. A dab of rose water to the wrists, a sweep of powder across the brow, a touch of scented pomade through the hair to tame any stray oil. Martha works quickly, but carefully, powdering the gentle slopes of Henrietta's neck and the slight hollow behind her ears where warmth lingers. When she finishes, she ties a fresh ribbon at her mistress's throat and steps back to admire the effect. To outsiders, Lady Fairley appears every inch the polished wife. A delicate scent of violets drifting behind her as she passes through drawing rooms and tea rooms. She carries a pomander in her reticule, a small silver orb filled with dried herbs and crushed petals, which she lifts to her nose when the city's reek becomes too bold. Yet beneath the powder and silk lies the truth she rarely speaks aloud. That privacy is a luxury few can afford, and cleanliness is as much performance as practice. The laundry maid below stairs will scrub her linen shifts and stockings in lye until her knuckles crack, while Martha brushes mud from the hem of her gown after she returns from market. The work of appearing clean is never hers alone. It rests upon the bowed backs and reddened hands of women who do not stand before mirrors, but kneel before buckets and basins. When Henrietta lifts her arms to allow Martha to adjust her stays, she catches a faint whiff of her own skin beneath the lavender. It is not unpleasant, but it is real, warm, human, a soft betrayal of the delicate illusion she maintains. She says nothing. Martha says nothing. They both understand that the work is not to wash away every trace of the body, but to mask it gently, wrap it in powder and scent until polite company can pretend the flesh beneath is untouched by sweat or toil. Outside the window, Bath's clean facades and clipped hedges hide the same smoky breath that blackens London's walls. Carriages clatter over cobbles, horses leave their droppings in tidy rows along the high street, and chimney sweeps slip through the mews to brush soot from the fine houses of Henrietta's neighbors. The filth is there for all to see. And yet, with enough rosewater and enough starch, the drawing rooms stay sweet enough to host tea without a hint of the coal fires that keep them warm. Before she leaves her room, Henrietta selects a small vial of violet water and dabs a drop behind each ear. She studies herself in the glass. The powdered brow, the neat hair, the stiff collar. She nods to Martha, who curtsies softly and gathers the basin and cloths, carrying away the secrets of her mistress's modest ablution. Downstairs, Henrietta will sit with her husband, speak gently of business and callers, perhaps offer a nod to the clergyman's wife, who visits with gossip in tow. No one will wonder how often she bathes, nor whether the scent of violets is her skin's true perfume. In this world, to smell sweet is to be clean enough, and to be clean enough is to be above question. Yet when the evening comes and the candles burn low, Henrietta will peel off her stays and find the faint salt line where sweat clung beneath the silk. She will dampen another cloth at her washstand, wipe the powder from her brow, and feel for a moment the soft, hidden warmth of her real skin, clean or not, hers alone, untouched by polite noses or watchful eyes. And so the gentlewoman's secret remains, that even in marble towns and candlelit parlors, true cleanliness is a fragile thing, half ritual, half illusion, clinging lightly to powder, perfume, and the quiet privacy of a bowl of warm water at dawn. In the sleepy village of Dunbridge, where the winding lanes dip between hedgerows and thatched roofs, huddle close against the restless English weather, the beating heart of daily life is neither church nor market, but the ancient stone well that stands at the crossroads. It is here that water rises from the earth, clear, cold, and precious, drawn bucket by bucket into the rough hands of those who cannot take a tap for granted. At dawn, when the mist still clings to hedges and sheep stand motionless in the dew-soaked fields, the first footsteps crunch upon the path to the well. Mothers with rough-hewn yokes balanced across their shoulders, children trailing sleepily behind, old men with stooped backs hauling battered pails. They gather with gentle nods and soft greetings, voices kept low out of courtesy for neighbors still wrapped in dreams behind shutters of warped oak. Among them is Margaret Pryor, her shawl pulled tight against the morning chill. She is neither young nor old, but weathered like the well itself, with hands thickened by decades of scrubbing, kneading, wringing out what the world offers and what it stains. She waits her turn with the others, wicker basket at her feet, 2 iron-banded buckets hanging from the yoke across her shoulders. When at last she reaches the stone lip, she braces her back and lowers the rope hand over hand, listening for the hollow splash far below. The pulley creaks, the rope drips, the bucket reappears glistening with cold promise. She pours carefully, watching the clear stream vanish into her pails. No drop is wasted. Here, every mouthful must be carried home, heated, rationed, and spent wisely. For though the well is deep, a dry season can turn it into a mouth that gives nothing back. As she lifts the second bucket, a girl beside her, young Annie Tulliver, hair wild under her bonnet, watches with wide eyes. Annie's mother is home with a babe too small to leave its cradle. So today, Annie must carry water for her mother's washing. Margaret catches the girl's glance and gives her a nod, a wordless offer of help should the child's arms falter on the long walk back. They speak little, for the well is both meeting place and silent witness. Gossip drifts like steam in winter. Who has a new babe? Who is down with fever? Whose husband came home drunk again? Yet voices here rarely rise above a whisper. To shout at the well is to risk souring its gift, or so the village folk say. Best to draw what you need and leave your troubles behind in the bucket's echo. When her pails are full and the yoke creaks across her shoulders, Margaret sets off along the narrow path to her cottage. Each step is careful, for a spilled bucket means another trip, another burden on a back already bowed by the day's chores waiting by the hearth. The air grows warmer as the sun slides higher, mist lifting to reveal cabbage rows and stone walls threaded with moss. She pauses only once, setting the buckets down beside a stile to ease her arms and rest her neck. At home, the well water is not drunk raw. Margaret will pour it into the copper kettle to be boiled for tea, for cooking porridge, for washing faces red with sleep. What remains will fill the battered tin tub she drags to the kitchen hearth every Saturday evening. There her husband Thomas will strip to the waist, boots set aside, and lower himself into the tepid water she ladles over his shoulders. He grumbles at the chill that creeps in before he is done, but he does not curse her labor. He knows well enough how many steps her feet have taken to bring this water to his skin. After him, the children will take their turns, smallest to tallest, each scrubbing away the week's dirt beneath the watchful eye of the hearth's flickering glow. By the time Margaret herself climbs in, last of all, always last, the water is tepid, darkened by all who came before. Yet she lowers herself with a sigh that is not quite complaint, for even water used is better than none at all. Soap is precious here, made at home when tallow is to spare, boiled with lye and stirred with an old stick until it thickens into yellow lumps. Margaret guards each bar as if it were a silver coin. No idle suds drift down her drain. She cuts thin slices, scrubs cloth and skin alike with care, and dries the remnants on the kitchen shelf for the next wash day. Some evenings, she stands by the hearth, wringing out the last damp cloth, listening to the hush that settles when children breathe heavy in their straw-filled beds. She thinks of the well then, of how it has watched her grow from a fresh-faced bride to a mother, from a mother to a woman with gray streaks hidden beneath her bonnet. The well does not care for age or sorrow. It simply waits, cold and deep, ready to give or withhold as the seasons turn. Outside her cottage, the bucket hangs beside the door, dripping onto the worn threshold. A small thing, yet within it rests the heart of the village. The power to boil a kettle, to wash a child's face, to scrub away the soot that drifts even here from the distant mill's tall chimney. In Dunbridge, no one speaks of bathing in marble tubs or scented soaps from far-off shops. Here, cleanliness is measured in steps, taken with a yoke biting into weary shoulders, in the hush of morning mist as the rope dips into ancient stone, in the quiet pride of water fetched, heated, poured, and carried away again. It is the simplest ritual, yet the one that binds them all. A chain of hands and buckets and whispered greetings that links each cottage to the next. The well its still, patient heart. Along the grey ribbon of the river Aire, where brick mills squat heavy against the low Yorkshire sky, a small wooden shack leans against the water's edge. Inside its walls, the damp air swirls with steam and the sharp bite of lye, for this is where Bridget Mallory plies her trade as a laundress, one of hundreds who bend their backs so that others might lift their chins in the glow of clean linen. Bridget is 42, though the river wind and the scalding water have weathered her face into lines that could belong to a woman twice that age. Her hands are raw as butcher's meat, her knuckles cracked and white where soap and soda have gnawed away any softness she might once have owned. She does not mind. These hands feed her 3 children, keep the landlord's threats at bay, and hold the memory of a husband lost to the mine's black mouth a decade past. Each dawn she lights the brazier, coaxing the coals into a red glow that warms the copper washpot balanced above. Water hauled from the river must be boiled to chase the filth from collars and cuffs, and to chase away the creeping diseases that love to nest in damp fabric and crowded alleys. Beside the brazier stands a battered table stacked with baskets of soiled linen, shirts stiff with sweat, chemises yellowed at the seams, petticoats bearing the secret stains of every kind of life. Bridget rolls up her sleeves and plunges her arms elbow deep into the pot, stirring with a wooden paddle until the lumps of soap dissolve in the swirl of rising bubbles. She hums to herself, though her voice is little more than a rasp. Over the years, she has learned to carry her thoughts inward, saving her breath for the rhythm of work. Soak, scrub, wring, rinse. Other laundresses come and go from the riverbank, some with toddlers perched on their hips, others with red-rimmed eyes that speak of sleepless nights spent tending sick husbands or crying infants. They nod to Bridget, respectful of her skill and her silence. She has been here longer than most, knows which stains surrender to soap and which need a scalding pinch of soda or a harsh slap against the ribbed washboard. One by one, the garments lose their filth in her calloused grip. She scrubs each collar until her knuckles bloom pink against the fabric. She beats the heavy sheets on a flat stone by the river's edge, icy water splashing up her arms, numbing the sting of hot lye. Over and over, her muscles coil and release, her back bending like a sapling in the wind. When the washing is done, Bridget lifts each piece high, inspecting seams and hems with a hawk's eye. A mist stain is an insult to her craft, a risk to her reputation among those who pay a few precious coins to claim a false sheen of gentility. She pins the clean linen to ropes strung between willows that bend low over the riverbank. The sheets flap like ghostly banners in the breeze, bright squares of white against the coal-darkened sky. Sometimes, as she pins the last garment to the line, Bridget allows herself a moment of soft dreaming. She imagines linen that stays clean for more than a day, gowns that never brush against filthy streets, shirts that return to her unblemished by sweat and soot. She wonders if, in some grand house far from the mill's roar, there is a lady who slips between these fresh sheets and spares a single thought for the woman who scalded her knuckles to make them white. The answer, she knows, is likely no. The lady above stairs sees only the crisp edge of a folded pillowcase, the smooth hem of a skirt that drapes elegantly at her feet. She does not smell the bite of lie or feel the grit beneath her nails. Such things belong to Bridget, to her alone, and to all the nameless women who stand knee-deep in river water, slapping and scrubbing the city's filth into the current until it drifts away unnoticed. At midday, Bridget rests her arms on the washboard, her breath misting the chill air. She unwraps a scrap of cloth holding a heel of bread and a sliver of cheese. Her fingers, still slick with soap, leave pale streaks across the crust as she eats. Beside her, the river carries bits of froth downstream, her only witness to the quiet sacrifice bound up in each swirl of suds and each raw hand plunged again into icy depths. When the last sheets are dry, she folds them with care, stacking them in a wicker basket whose handle has worn a groove into her palm over countless journeys through muddy streets. She will deliver them door to door, the doctor's wife, the schoolmaster's spinster sister, the merchant's bustling household. Each will nod curtly, counting coins into her hand with a polite smile that rarely reaches the eyes. But Bridget does not flinch. She bows her head in gratitude, though her shoulders ache from the lie it carries. She knows that while these coins keep her children fed, they buy her no true standing among the clean collars and starched cuffs. Her place is beside the brazier, at the river's edge, at the foot of the line where the linen flutters clean only because her skin has borne its filth first. At night, when the last shirt is folded and the brazier's coals burn low, Bridget soaks her hands in a chipped basin of lukewarm water. She rubs a thin smear of lard into the cracks, a small mercy before sleep claims her. Tomorrow the river will wait again, patient and cold, ready to swallow more dirt, more soap, more silent sacrifice. And Bridget, in her quiet pride, will stand ready too. For while the world above her dozes on fresh pillows and clean sheets, it dreams easy only because somewhere by the water's edge a laundress stands guard with red hands and unyielding will, scrubbing out the grime of a restless age one blister at a time. In a narrow lane behind the bustling high street of Edinburgh, tucked between a cobbler's dark doorway and a sweet shop perfumed with sugar and spice, stands a barber's shop so small that its striped pole nearly brushes the eaves above. Its wooden sign swings gently in the damp wind, creaking in rhythm with the city's endless hum. Here, men come not merely for the scrape of a razor, but for the simple pleasure of a warm basin and a bit of talk to soften the day's sharp edges. Inside, the smell is sharp with lather and the faint sweetness of bay rum. Shelves bow under glass bottles filled with oils, pomades, and the pale bricks of shaving soap, cut from great wheels that arrive by cart from a chandler's shop by the docks. Against the far wall stands a broad chair of cracked leather, the seat smoothed by countless backsides settling in with a sigh. William McIver, the barber, is a man of steady hands and quicker tongue. His customers swear his razors never nick, and his ears never truly forget a whisper passed beneath the hiss of a strop. He is 50 now, his hair receding to gray patches at the temples, but his eyes are as keen as the steel he hones each morning before the shutters swing wide. It is still early when the first customer arrives. A clerk from the bank nearby, pale and thin, with ink smudged on his cuffs and a soft worry line furrowing his brow. William greets him with a nod, gestures to the chair, and sets about mixing fresh lather in a shallow pewter bowl. Into the bowl, he dribbles a dash of hot water from the kettle that bubbles on a small stove in the corner, the steam curling like a ghost around the blade he lays out for the day's work. With gentle fingers, William presses a warm cloth to the clerk's cheeks and chin. The steam loosens the stubble, coaxes the night sweat from pores that rarely feel fresh air in the bank's dim counting room. The clerk closes his eyes as the brush dances across his skin, thick with creamy suds that smell faintly of cloves and rosemary. A shave is never just a shave in William's shop. It is a small escape, a ritual that feels more indulgent than most men will admit. For a moment, the city's grime stays at bay. Washed from the brow with a splash of warm water, scraped away in careful strokes that leave the skin smooth and almost new. As the razor slides, William hums softly. Talk drifts between them, news of the latest scandal at court, a rumor of a new ship docked at Leith brimming with foreign spices. The whispered misdeeds of a neighbor's boy caught poaching rabbits in the Earl's Wood. The clerk murmurs a polite laugh, but mostly stays still, trusting his throat to William's blade. When the shave is done, William wipes away the last trace of lather with a fresh cloth and pats the clerk's skin dry with a linen towel, still warm from the stove. He dabs a splash of bay rum on his customer's neck and cheeks, the scent bright and bracing, a faint shield against the city's stale air. The clerk rises lighter, pockets a coin into William's palm, and steps out into the gray street with his chin lifted a fraction higher than when he arrived. All morning they come. A butcher with rough hands and a red nose. A young poet who pays in coin when he can and in verses when he cannot. An old sea captain who likes his beard trimmed sharp as a naval line. Each one brings the city's breath with him, soot and sweat clinging to collar and cuff, and each leaves a bit fresher after carrying the barber's quiet magic into the world beyond the striped pole. In the corner sits William's son, young Angus, sweeping stray hairs into a battered tin pail, fetching fresh towels from the line that dries by the stove. Someday, Angus will inherit the strop and the razors, the basin and the secrets murmured in a voice just above the hush of the blade. For now, he watches the old man's hands, memorizing each flick of the wrist, each swirl of the brush, each angle of steel that coaxes the dirt and weariness from a working man's skin. Not every man in Edinburgh can afford a barber's basin. Many scrape their own beards at home with cheap razors dulled by weeks of careless use, wiping the blood from nicks with a rag that smells faintly of last night's stew. But for those who can spare the few pence, William's chair offers more than a shave. It is warmth in winter, company when the world feels cold, a gentle lie that one can wash away the soot that seeps through every seam of the city's brick and bone. In the evenings when the last customer leaves and the door is barred, William rinses his razors in scalding water, dries them on soft linen, and lays them out in a neat row by the kettle's fading warmth. He scrubs the basin clean with a bit of soap and a steady hand, though his own face remains unshaven, rough with the day's neglect. He knows that tomorrow, the same men will return, stubble grown back, news fresh on their lips, secrets ready to spill again into the steam of the pewter bowl. He knows that a warm cloth, a sharp blade, and a splash of bay rum cannot truly cleanse a man of his worries or his sins. Yet in a city wrapped in coal smoke and chill rain, the illusion is enough. So he snuffs the lamp, lifts the kettle from the stove, and steps out into the lane where the high street's bustle has softened into evening hush. His hands smell of soap and clove, a quiet reminder that for a few coins and a careful touch, even a weary city can feel clean, if only for the space of a single shave. Beyond the edge of town, where the fine houses yield to fields turned to mud and smoke, stands the gray block of the parish workhouse. Its windows are narrow and barred, its door thick and iron-studded, and its walls smell faintly of cabbage broth, cold stone, and the weary breath of those who have nowhere else to lay their heads. Here, among the ragged rows of paupers, the idea of being clean is not a comfort, but a command. For the workhouse demands order, and order demands soap and water, however grudgingly given. Inside, the day begins before dawn with the clang of a bell that echoes through draughty corridors. Men and women rouse from their narrow pallets, blankets folded with stiff precision, feet slipping into rough clogs that scrape against the flagstones. Among them moves Jane Holloway, a widow of 35, shoulders bent not by age but by sorrow carried like a hidden stone within her. Jane is assigned to the washroom this month, a punishment and a mercy at once. The washroom is warmer than the wards, for the big copper boilers rumble all day, churning steam into the chill air. Yet the warmth comes at a cost. Hands scalded raw, shoulders twisted from hauling dripping sheets, backs aching from hours bent over deep stone sinks. The workhouse linen is no dainty matter of lace and lavender. It is coarse and heavy. Uniforms for pauper children, blankets stiff with sweat and the sour reek of the sick room, rough shirts for men who break stones in the yard from dawn till dusk. To keep these things clean is not kindness but necessity, for filth breeds lice, and lice breed fever, and fever can slip through a dormitory like a shadow with sharp teeth. Jane joins the line of women at the boiler. Each carries a bundle of linen, some so foul with the stink of sores and unwashed skin that they gag as they shake them out. The mistress of the washroom, a gaunt woman named Mrs. Pierce, barks orders without lifting her eyes from her ledger. Soap is rationed tight, coarse brown blocks that dissolve too quickly in the steaming water, their sharp bite softened by overuse. The women plunge their arms into the suds, scrubbing with stiff brushes until their wrists throb and their knuckles weep tiny cracks. They move in silence, for talking wastes breath that could be spent beating grime from fabric. The only sound is the hiss of the boiler and the slap of wet cloth against stone. At midday, the laundresses pause for a crust of bread and a dipper of thin broth, steam curling around their faces as they huddle near the boiler's brick belly for borrowed warmth. Jane cradles her cracked hands in her lap, feeling the sting of heat seeping into swollen joints. She thinks of her two boys, gone to the apprentice house at the edge of the parish. Scrubbing floors and hauling coal for their keep, their thin shirts perhaps passing through her own hands now, though she cannot be sure. When the meal is done, the washing begins again. Buckets of rinse water slosh across the stone floor, pooling around tired feet. Piles of damp linen steam gently in the corner, waiting for the drying yard, where they will be pegged to lines strung between high walls topped with broken glass to keep the desperate from climbing over. There is no real privacy here, no moment to slip away and wash one's own skin in peace. Once a week, the paupers are led by rows into a bathing room, little more than a tiled chamber with wooden tubs lined up like troughs. The water is warm only if the boiler has been generous, the soap doled out in miserly lumps that vanish before grime can truly loosen its hold. Men scrub back to back in sullen silence, shoulders bristling with shame beneath the matron's watchful eye. Women bend beneath rough cloths, hair half-washed and dripping onto bare toes turned blue with cold. Jane remembers her first bath here, the scald of shame hotter than the water itself. She remembers the matron's barked orders, the way the other women averted their eyes yet watched all the same, as if to remind themselves that no one's dignity is safe inside these walls. Now the ritual has dulled into routine, a moment's respite, a quick shiver of heat before the dirt returns, ground back into skin by the work that never ends. In the drying yard that afternoon, Jane pins a row of shirts to the line, the wind snapping them like pale flags above her head. She watches a sparrow settle on the high wall, feathers fluffed against the cold, head cocked as if it might pity these humans in their gray aprons and red raw hands. She wonders if her boys are warm enough, if their shirts smell of the same harsh soap and cold stone. When the day's washing is done, she hauls the baskets indoors, folding the stiff linens into neat piles for the overseer's tally. She wipes her hands on her apron, the fabric damp and smelling faintly of lye. She feels the soap crust beneath her nails, the bitter comfort of knowing that at least her labor keeps the worst sickness at bay. For the workhouse has little mercy for the sick, and less for the idle. That night, as she lies on her narrow pallet in the ward, Jane curls her aching hands beneath her chin. Her skin smells faintly clean, not the sweetness of rosewater or lavender sachets, but the plain, sharp scent of soap and steam, the smell of someone trying to hold back the creeping rot with bristle brush and boiled water. She drifts towards sleep with her back to the iron bed frame, her dreams brushing the edge of freedom she no longer expects. In the stillness, the washroom waits for morning, for another dawn of scalded knuckles and sloshing buckets, for the small dignity carved from the harsh rule that even the destitute must be washed clean before they are allowed to survive another day in the parish's grey embrace. Deep in the Welsh valleys, where black slag heaps rise like unnatural hills against a sky forever smudged with drifting soot, the coal pits breathe out men each evening. Men whose skin is tattooed in coal dust so fine it weaves itself into every crease and pore. Beneath this sooty cloak, bones ache and lungs rattle. Yet for many families, the pit is bread on the table and a roof overhead, however thin the mortar that holds it. In a narrow terraced cottage wedged between others of its kind, Evan Pritchard trudges home at dusk. His boots leave dark prints on the flagstones of the lane. Under his cap, hair stiff with sweat and grit clings to his brow. His hands, gloved all day in dust and hard stone, curl around the handle of his tin lunch pail. Empty now, but for a crust tucked into his pocket for his youngest boy. Inside, the hearth burns low but steady, tended by his wife Cian, whose arms are pale where they emerge from flour-dusted sleeves. On the worn rug before the grate sits the battered tin bath, shallow, dented along one rim, its bottom scrubbed bright in places where countless feet have polished the metal smooth. Beside it steams a kettle, its spout rattling gently as the last measure of hot water bubbles within. Evan sets down his pail, shrugs off his heavy jacket, and eases himself onto the wooden stool beside the hearth. He unlaces boots caked in fine black grit. Cian kneels without a word, lifting the kettle and tipping its precious warmth into the half-filled tub. Steam rises, carrying with it the faint scent of coal smoke and soap shavings she scraped from the last bar, stretching what she can between paydays. Stripping down to his trousers, Evan sinks into the shallow bath with a hiss through his teeth, the warmth biting at skin that has known only the cold embrace of the earth since dawn. He leans his head back against the tub's rim. Cian lifts a jug, scooping the warm water and pouring it over his shoulders, again and again, until the runnels of coal dust gather in gray rivers that swirl around his ribs and knees. They say nothing at first. The only sounds are the crackle of the hearth and the soft splash of water slipping back into the tin. She lifts a coarse cloth, old flannel gone thin as gauze, and begins to scrub at the back of his neck, her fingers pressing gently but firmly, as if she could rub the ache of stone and dark tunnels from his bones. The children peer in from the doorway, wide-eyed but hushed. They know this ritual is not for them yet. Their turn comes later, when the tub is half-drained and the water lukewarm. For now, they watch their father's silhouette flicker in firelight, the man who disappears into the earth each day and comes back marked by it, only to be made new again by the warmth of soap and a wife's quiet hands. Once, when Evan was newly a boy himself, he had asked his own father why the coal never truly washed off. Even after the bath, there would be a shadow beneath the nails, a smudge in the line of the knuckles, a faint gray ghost in the creases of the skin. His father had laughed, not unkindly, and told him, because the pit owns part of you, the bath just borrows it back for a while. Tonight, Evan closes his eyes as Cian lifts a small cake of homemade soap, rough and yellow. It smells sharp with lye and faintly sweet with a scrap of pine resin she saved from a Christmas branch. She scrubs his arms, lifts each hand in turn, working the soap into a thick lather that slides away as gray foam into the bathwater. When she finishes, Evan stands carefully, water sloshing over the tub's edge onto the flagstones. Cian wraps a thin towel around his shoulders, rubbing warmth back into skin raised in gooseflesh from the draft that slips beneath the door. She tips the tub toward the hearth and lifts the heavy water pail by pail to the doorstep, where it will be dumped into the lane's gutter, coal-black water flowing away beneath the stars. Later, the children will take their turns, smallest first, barefoot feet stepping into water still faintly warm, where their father's body left it behind. They will squeal and giggle as their mother hushes them for splashing, though she cannot quite hide her small smile. When they finish, Cian will drain the last grimy trickle into the yard and scrub the tub clean with a rag, hanging it by the back door to dry in the wind that whistles down from the hills. Evan sits once more by the hearth, now wrapped in his shirt and a knitted blanket thrown over broad shoulders. His skin smells faintly of pine and soap, though beneath his nails the black still lingers. He will carry it back down with him tomorrow, into the pit's hungry tunnels, where the rock groans and the lamps burn low. Yet for tonight, here by the flicker of the fire and the hush of his children slipping into bed, Evan Pritchard is clean enough. His wife's hands rest on his shoulders, strong and sure. The pit may claim its share each day, but the soap and the tin bath, the warm jug and the steady hush of water poured over tired skin, these small things remind him that not every piece of him belongs to the dark. Some parts, scrubbed raw and warm, belong here, above ground, in the light of his family's quiet faith that tomorrow he will return again, and the bath will wait once more. Along the winding roads that stitch together the hamlets and market towns of the English countryside, a small cart creaks steadily beneath a patchwork sky. It rattles over ruts and puddles, past hedgerows trembling with sparrows, carrying with it the quiet music of bottles clinking and soap cakes shifting in straw-lined crates. The man who drives this cart is known in these parts as Old Willem the Peddler, though he is not yet 50. His back is bent from years of roads, his boots patched thrice over, but his eyes are quick, and his tongue quicker still when he has something to sell. Tied behind the cart plods a patient donkey, its ears flicking at midges. The beast's name is Rosie, and she knows these lanes as well as her master does, which gates stick, which streams run shallow enough to ford, which inns will let an old man and his donkey share warmth by the stable hearth when rain comes pounding the thatch. Old Willem's stock is small but curious. Cakes of harsh yellow soap stacked beside blue bottles of hair oil, tiny corked vials of lavender water, combs carved from horn, and a handful of cheap brushes for scrubbing collars or boots. Sometimes, if he is lucky, he carries a few tins of tooth powder, chalk and mint, for those who fancy their breath fresh enough to greet the vicar or their neighbor's wife without shame. He stops where the road asks him to. Sometimes at the broad green of a village square where children trail behind the cart like ducklings, eyes wide at the glitter of colored glass and the promise of sweet biscuits hidden beneath a cloth. Other times he halts at lonely farm gates, where a woman with red knuckles and weary shoulders will lean on the fence and listen to his chatter while choosing which small bar of soap she can afford this month. Today he rattles into Fenwick, a hamlet crouched low among fields of winter turnips and bristling hedges. Smoke drifts from chimneys already hungry for the first frost. He pulls Rosie to a halt outside the inn, whose painted sign swings and groans in the wind. Children gather quickly, followed by their mothers, and Old Willem stands with one boot on the wheel's rim, tipping his battered cap with a grin as he calls his wares. A bit of soap to make a man fit for Sunday, ladies? A splash of lavender for your pillows, to chase the fleas away? A brush strong enough to tame the collars of the worst farmhand in the county? His voice carries in the cold air, warm with mischief yet threaded with gentle respect. He knows these women have little to spare. They haggle with him in whispers, careful not to let neighbors overhear how many pennies clink in their aprons. A young wife named Elsie steps forward, a baby on her hip, coins hidden in her palm. She eyes a bar of soap wrapped in brown paper, stamped with the name of a faraway city she's never seen. London Soap Works, it says, as if the word itself holds magic. Willem unwraps it just a little, letting her see the pale color, the hard edge that promises it will last longer than the crumbly lumps she makes at home from leftover tallow and lye that burns her wrists raw. Will it keep the smell away, then? She asks, half embarrassed by her own words. Willem's grin softens. He does not lie outright. Not quite. It'll help. A bit of this and warm water, and you'll feel the difference that I promise. And a drop of this. He lifts a tiny corked bottle. Lavender water for your linens. Keeps the fleas from biting and the pillows sweet. Elsie bites her lip, glances at the baby's chapped cheek, then at the coins in her palm. She nods. A trade is made. Willem tucks the coins away, hands her the wrapped soap and the tiny bottle. She slips them into her apron pocket, like secrets too precious for the world to see. By noon, the cart is a little lighter. He sells a tin of tooth powder to a farmhand with crooked teeth and a sweetheart up the lane. He sells a stiff brush to the innkeeper's daughter, who says her mother wants the table scrubbed clean for the harvest feast. Now and then he gives away a scrap of soap to a child with bare feet and a smear of jam on his chin. a kindness that costs him little but wins him trust for the next visit. When the day's trade slows and the villagers drift home to supper, Willem climbs onto the cart, Rosie's reins loose in his hands. He hums to himself, an old song about a maid and a sailor, as the cart rattles on. His bones ache from the damp, but he is content enough, for tomorrow he will find another lane, another hamlet, another row of hopeful faces who dream, if only for a while, of soap that smells sweeter than sweat and water that runs warmer than rain. In truth, he knows his wares do not change much. A scrap of soap does not banish the coal smoke from a miner's coat or keep fleas forever from a straw mattress. But it buys a few days' grace, the soft promise that a face washed clean feels braver, a child scrubbed pink feels loved, a pillow scented faintly of lavender feels like a small fortress against the creeping filth of a hard world. At dusk, Willem halts the cart near a hedgerow, unpacks a crust of bread and a sliver of cheese. He eats with Rosie dozing beside him, the last light slipping behind the fields. When the stars prick the dark sky, he curls beneath a threadbare blanket beside his cart, the soft clink of bottles his lullaby. The world may be dirty and cold, but tomorrow it will greet him with new coins and new stories. And the promise that somewhere, soap and water might bring a bit of clean hope to hands that need it most. In a cramped row house tucked between a cobbler's shop and the rear entrance of a bustling mill, old Martha Keene sits by the glow of a single tallow candle. Her hands rest in her lap. Broad palms, fingers bent with age, nails trimmed short but stained in the creases from years of her quiet work. She is the midwife of Ashcroft Street, called for when babies come howling into the world and mothers grip bed frames slick with sweat and fear. Tonight, the candle flickers beside a wooden basin half filled with warm water. Martha leans forward, dropping in a cloth, coarse linen, boiled so often the fibers have given up softness. She wrings it out slowly, steam curling around her gnarled knuckles. The water is faintly scented with carbolic soap, a precious bit of modern wisdom she has learned to trust when she can afford it. Not every birth can wait for scrubbed hands and scalded cloths, but Martha does her best to keep the shadows at bay. Outside, the street hums with the restless city. A cart clatters over cobblestones, a drunkard laughs in the alley, the faint, steady chuff of the mill's night shift echoes from beyond the iron gates. But here, in this small back room, life and death stand shoulder to shoulder, and Martha holds them both in her cracked palms. Tonight's child is not yet here. But word has come. A knock on the door, urgent whispers. Young Nellie Carter, 3 doors down, her first baby already stubborn, and her pains come early and sharp. Martha knows that Nellie's husband, a weaver at the mill, has no coin to spare for anything grand. No doctor, no clean hospital bed. Only Martha's steady hands, her boiled rag, her basin of warm water fetched from the cracked pump out back. She gathers her tools, the linen rags folded neat in a basket, the bar of yellow soap scraped thin from so many scrubbings, a tin of clean water sealed tight to keep out the coal dust that drifts through every cracked pane. She ties on her shawl, hooks the basket over her arm, and steps into the damp chill of the alley. Inside Nellie's narrow room, the air is thick already. Lamp oil and sweat, the stale tang of fear that clings to birth like a shadow. Nellie lies on her side, hair plastered to her brow, eyes wide and shining with the helpless panic of a girl barely out of her teens. Beside her stands her husband, Matthew, wringing his cap in his hands as though he could twist the pain from the air itself. Martha sets down her basket, nods to Matthew to fetch more water. She rolls her sleeves, scrubs her hands raw with the sliver of soap in the basin by the hearth, muttering a quiet prayer that the soap holds true tonight. She knows too well how infection can slip through careless hands, how childbed fever blooms when filth clings to fingers, rags, the damp edge of a bedstead. She wipes Nellie's brow with the warm cloth, whispers comfort, old words used so many times they feel like lullabies to the laboring. Outside the closed door, life goes on. Footsteps in the corridor, the squeak of a floorboard above, the distant roar of a loom still weaving cotton long into the night. But here all the world narrows to breath, pain, water cooling too fast in a shallow basin. The birth drags on. Martha wipes her hands again and again, rinses her cloth, soaks it in fresh water when she can. There is no endless supply. Only the tin kettle on the grate, a few precious pails fetched from the yard. Soap must stretch between washed hands and cleaned cloths, between sweat-slicked skin and bloodied sheets. There is no gown of crisp linen here, no crisp white cap as in the city's fine lying-in wards. Only Martha's rag, her soft muttered prayers, the warmth of water that chases the worst of the world's filth from a new life's first breath. When the baby finally slips free, the small room hushes. Martha lifts the child, a girl, squalling like a tiny storm, and wraps her quick in a rag still warm from the kettle's pour. She wipes the baby's face, clearing the clinging birth blood with gentle fingers. She does not hurry. Even here, at the threshold between darkness and dawn, she holds tight to the old truth. Clean hands save lives. Matthew's knees buckle as he sinks beside Nellie, who lies slack and pale but breathing. Martha busies herself with fresh cloths, pressing warm water to the mother's brow, changing the sheets as best she can with what little she has. Outside, the city shifts from night to dawn. A rooster calls somewhere behind the mill. A cart rattles past hauling sacks of coal for the morning fires. When the worst is done, Martha folds her rag carefully, rinsing it in what clean water remains. She knows she will boil it again when she returns home, soap it twice if she can spare enough shavings. For now, it sits in her basket like a quiet promise. One more battle fought against the filth that waits in every corner of the city's narrow lanes. Nellie drifts towards sleep, her breathing soft and slow, the baby nestled at her side. Matthew grips Martha's hand, pressing a coin into her palm. It is hardly enough for all her hours, her worry, her basin, and soap. But she takes it with a nod, slipping the coin into her apron pocket. She does not work for coin alone. She works because in this city of coal dust and crowded rooms, the simplest drop of warm water, the plainest scrap of soap, the humblest rag can stand between life and the grave. So she steps into the dawn with her basket swinging at her side, her feet finding the ruts and puddles of Ashcroft Street. She will wash her hands again, scrub the rag again, and wait for the next knock in the night. When another mother's cry will call her back, basin in hand, to fight filth and fever with water, soap, and the steadfastness of her own two hands. When the great clanging bell of Hawthorne Mill tolls at dawn, its echo rolls through the brick terraces and wakes the rows of pale faces turned toward the chill morning light. Among those who stir beneath threadbare blankets is young Lydia Marsh, 15, slight as a reed, hair the color of weak tea, eyes bright but rimmed in coal dust shadows. She rises without complaint, her bare feet whispering across the cold flagstones as she lifts a chipped basin from under the narrow bed. The mill hums even before she steps through its doors. Its breath drifts on the morning breeze. The hiss of steam engines, the low thunder of looms shuttling back and forth, weaving strands of raw cotton into yards of cloth that feed factories, shipyards, and shops. Lydia herself will never see. She is one among hundreds. Girls with skirts tucked at the waist, sleeves rolled, hair bound tight to keep it clear of whirring gears that do not forgive a stray curl. Before she leaves the cramped room she shares with two other girls, Lydia fills her basin with water drawn from the pump in the yard. The pump handle squeaks, cold iron biting her palm as she works it up and down, coaxing the thin stream into her battered tin pail. There is no luxury here for warm water or scented soap. Only the iron chill of the pump and a sliver of harsh soap scraped thin as a wafer. Inside the shared washroom, a lean-to nailed to the side of the boarding house, the air smells faintly of mildew and coal smoke, drifting from the mill's tall stacks. Lydia strips to her camise, scrubs her neck and arms with quick, brisk motions, splashing water over the basin's rim onto the earthen floor. She works the soap into her hairline where the cotton dust clings stubborn as pollen, scrubbing until her scalp prickles raw. The water clouds quickly, gray with yesterday's grime, the sweat of 12 hours stooped over looms, the stale air breathed and rebreathed among spinning wheels and rattling frames. She pours what's left over her feet, wipes her ankles with a scrap of cloth cut from an old shift, then wraps her hair in a ribbon that was once bright but has dulled to a ghost of blue. Beside her, other girls stand in silence or soft whispers, each dipping cloths into basins, each fighting the same quiet battle against the mill's creeping dirt. There is no giggling here, not at this hour, Not when the foreman's whistle can pierce the yard at any moment, demanding feet inside, fingers nimble, eyes open wide, no matter how poorly they slept. At Hawthorne Mill, the day is long, the air thick with lint that drifts like snow if snow could choke a throat and line a lung with damp chalk. Lydia ties a scrap of muslin over her mouth when the overseer isn't watching, breathing through the cloth to keep the worst of the fluff from her tongue. Her hands fly across the loom's narrow path, mind half drifting to the warmth of the small basin that will greet her tonight when the bell tolls again to end the day. In stolen moments, a minute snatched when the loom jams, or when the foreman turns to bark orders at another line. Lydia dreams of water that runs clear and warm from a tap fixed in a wall. She has heard of houses in the wealthier streets that boast such marvels. Water on command, pouring steady into shining porcelain, no pump handle to squeal and bite her palm. She dreams of soap that smells of roses, not harsh tallow and sharp lye that crack her knuckles and sting her eyes. But when the loom clatters to life again, she forgets such dreams and counts the shuttles pass instead, her lips moving in silent numbers as her fingers catch threads before they snarl and snap. Around her, the hum of the mill is a heartbeat, constant, heavy, rattling through the soles of her worn boots and the tips of her small clever fingers. When the final bell tolls, dusk settles in the alleys between the mill's long wings. The girls slip out in twos and threes, heads bent against the coal dust drifting down like evening mist. Back in the boarding house, Lydia lifts her basin once more, lines up at the pump with the same patient nods and quiet greetings. She carries the water inside, sets it by her cot, and scrubs again. Neck, arms, feet. The worst of the mill's dust slides down her skin and puddles at her toes. There is no bath to stretch into, no warm steam to curl around her shoulders, only this shallow basin and her cracked bar of soap. Yet each stroke of the cloth feels like a small rebellion, a chance to push back against the mill's grip, to remind herself that the girl beneath the dust still belongs to no machine. When she slides beneath her rough blanket, Lydia's skin is not truly clean. The dust still clings beneath her nails, lines the crook of her elbows, weaves itself into her hair like a secret she cannot wash away. But her face smells faintly of soap, her feet are warm against the thin straw mattress, and her hands rest light on her belly as her breath slows to the rhythm of sleep. Outside, the mill's loom never truly stops. The night shift clatters on, lint swirling through the lamplight. But for a few hours, the basin waits empty by her bed, the soap drying in a cracked dish, and Lydia drifts into dreams where water runs warm from a tap, and a girl can scrub away the mill's grip for good. Beyond the crowded lanes and brick terraces of Sheffield's eastern quarter, the old stone walls of Broadgate Prison stand grim and watchful, their soot-darkened towers cutting the low sky like a warning. Within those thick walls, iron bars and cold flagstones guard men and women alike. Thieves, debtors, the desperate, and the damned, all swept together like coal dust at the city's feet. In a small yard behind the main block, a low outbuilding hums with damp air and the echoes of boots on stone. This is the prison bathhouse, though any man who has stood shivering within its cracked brick walls knows it is hardly a bathhouse at all, more a place to rinse away the worst of filth before the stench leaks through the iron bars into the governor's office above. On a raw morning in October, Thomas Lacey stands in line with a dozen others, eyes fixed on the scuffed heels of the man ahead. He is 29, shoulders drawn tight beneath a striped jacket, stiff with dried sweat and old grime. His hair clings to his scalp, greasy and tangled. He has been here 4 weeks for stealing a loaf of bread. 4 weeks of stale straw, thin broth, and the stink of too many bodies pressed close in the dormitory, where coughs rattle through the darkness like rats behind the walls. A turnkey barks an order, and the line shuffles forward. Inside the bathhouse, steam ghosts up from a great iron cauldron where water bubbles over a low fire. Beside it stands a battered tub, half filled with lukewarm gray water that smells faintly of carbolic and old soap scrapings. A single rag hangs from a nail, stained from the last man's scrub, stiff at the edges. When Thomas's turn comes, he strips in silence, folding his prison shirt and trousers on a bench damp from the last man's dripping feet. The turnkey thrusts a small lump of coarse soap into his palm, the smell sharp enough to make his eyes sting. He steps into the tub, its tin bottom slick beneath his soles. The water laps only to his knees, cold now from a dozen bodies passing through before him. He crouches, splashes water over his shoulders, scrubs at his chest with the hard soap until his skin pinks under the grime. Around him, the others stand stripped and silent, waiting their turn. Eyes averted not from modesty, but from the stubborn habit of looking away. For here, dignity is thinner than steam, shame thicker than soap. A warder dips a jug into the cauldron, sloshes another pail of warm water over Thomas's back without warning. It shocks his spine, makes him gasp, but he catches the trickle in his cupped hands, rubs it into his hair. Fleas slip away with the lather, drowning in the gray soup that swirls around his ankles before draining through a rusted grate in the floor. There is no towel. Thomas wipes himself with his bare hands, flicking water from his elbows before pulling his damp shirt over raw shoulders. His feet are still wet as they slap back onto the cold stone corridor that leads him away from the bathhouse and into the yard. Outside, the yard is little more than a square of packed dirt, hemmed in by walls that shut out the city's smoke, but not its damp chill. Here, the prisoners stand in ranks when the weather is fair, heads bent under the warder's eye. Today, Thomas joins a line near the wall, breathing in the sharp wind that cuts through his wet collar. Some men mumble that the bath is worse than the cell. The humiliation of stripping under another's watch, the freezing bite of water that never seems enough to wash away the stink of sweat and the sour reek of the prison slop. Yet they know, too, that without it, sickness would breed faster than the rats that scurry through the corners of the dormitory. A man too filthy to breathe is a man too sick to break stones, and broken stones feed the prison's purse. Thomas runs a hand over his damp hair, fingernails catching at the scabs hidden at his scalp's edge. He thinks of the washstand in his mother's kitchen when he was a boy. The cracked jug, the tin basin, the rag she kept folded by the hearth. He remembers her voice chiding him to scrub behind his ears, her strong hand tipping warm water down his back as he squealed and laughed in a way that feels like someone else's life now. At night, when the dormitory hushes to a low tide of coughing and shuffling straw, Thomas lies on his pallet and smells the faint sharpness of the soap still clinging to his wrists. It does not last. By morning, sweat and breath and the press of too many bodies will drown it out. Still, for an hour or two, he feels almost clean. Clean enough to remember the world outside the walls. Clean enough to dream that the grime might lift for good one day, when his sentence ends and the turnkey swings the door wide. Some men scoff at such thoughts. They say the dirt never leaves you. Not once Broadgate marks your name in its black ledger. But Thomas holds the scent of carbolic soap close, a ghost of something decent stitched into the tatters of his hope. When the bell clangs again, he will line up once more, break stone once more, sleep once more beneath thin blankets beside snoring strangers. But the bath, bitter, cold, humiliating as it is, reminds him that somewhere outside these walls, a basin waits, a warm rag waits, a kitchen hearth waits. And in the iron belly of Broadgate Prison, where hope and filth claw at each other every day, that small memory of warm water and soap is sometimes enough to keep a man standing in the line, chin lifted just high enough not to forget he was clean once, and maybe again. Far from the chimneys and clatter of the city streets, the Clipper Morning Star cuts through the gray swell of the North Atlantic, her sails tight with a stiff wind that hisses in the rigging like an old cook's kettle. Above deck, ropes slap the masts and gulls wheel overhead, crying out as if to mock the men who labor below. Men like Nathan Cole, an ordinary seaman who scrubs the decks by dawn and stands watch by dusk, salt crusting at the corners of his eyes and the cuffs of his sleeves. For weeks now, the Morning Star has known no land, only rolling waves and the cold bite of sea spray that seeps through canvas and skin alike. Cleanliness out here is not so much a luxury as it is a test of a man's grit, for there is no fresh water to be squandered on bathing when barrels must stretch to cooking, brewing tea, and slaking thirsts as fierce as any hunger. Nathan crouches by the port rail at sunrise, stripped to his breeches, bare feet braced wide on the heaving planks. Beside him a bucket bobs at his knee, half filled with seawater hauled up in a rope sling moments ago. The brine sloshes cold against his wrist as he dips a rag into it, the salt stinging a fresh scrape on his knuckle from hauling canvas in last night's squall. There is no soap today. What little the crew has is hoarded for true filth, for greasy pots in the galley, or the foul residue in the bilge. Instead, salt must do. Nathan scrubs his chest, arms, the sweat-stiff hair at the nape of his neck, working the rag in rough circles until the brine numbs his skin. The cold does not bother him now. He is used to the sea's bite, used to its indifference. Other sailors pass behind him, some nodding, some cursing the cold wind that turns a quick wash into a dance with the chill. A few join him, dipping their own rags, dousing heads with quick splashes, scrubbing salt and sweat and the stale stench of damp hammocks from their bodies as best they can before the next bell calls them back to lines and sails. Below deck, hammocks swing in the stale gloom, heavy with the scent of old wool and men's breath. Fresh air finds its way down only when the hatches stand open and the wind cooperates. Nathan has learned to wash his clothes in the same salt bucket when he can spare the time. Shirt, neckerchief, socks beaten against the deck planks, then strung along the ratlines to dry in the stiff wind, flapping like pale pennants above the endless heave of the sea. He remembers his mother's voice when he was small, how she would chide him for muddy feet, for soot-smudged elbows, for the stray streaks of ash he'd bring in from the yard. Back then, a wash meant warm water poured from the kettle, a rag dipped in lavender soap if times were good. Now he tastes salt on his lips and calls it clean enough. When the sun lifts fully above the horizon, painting the white sails gold at their edges, Nathan tips the bucket over the side, watching the water arc away in a glinting sheet before the ocean swallows it whole. He rubs his arms briskly, gooseflesh rising, then pulls on his rough shirt, the fabric stiff where salt has dried into its seams. The salt water never truly washes a man clean. It leaves its mark on everything. Stiff collars, gritty hair, skin that cracks at the creases of elbows and knees. Yet it is the only baptism a sailor can claim on these endless voyages between continents. The only thing that keeps the stink of close quarters and sour breath from choking the narrow bunks below deck. When the watch bell clangs, Nathan coils his rope and shoulders back to his post by the main mast. The sea rolls beneath him, steady and endless, its voice a constant hush that mocks the idea of filth and soap alike. Yet the men still scrub when they can, still rinse the sweat from their skin with buckets of the same salt water that tosses their ship like a toy. Sometimes, when storms blow hard and the rain lashes down, the men stand stripped to the waist on deck, laughing like children as the sky pours them clean. Those are the best baths. Rain so fierce it slaps grime from skin and grease from hair, washing sweat and salt into the scuppers where it swirls away with the ocean's own foam. Tonight, when his watch ends, Nathan will lie back in his hammock, one arm behind his head, breathing the sour air and the faint salt still clinging to his chest. He will dream of fresh water that does not sting the eyes, of soap that foams white and sweet-smelling like his mother's old laundry bucket back home. But when dawn comes, he will rise again to the slap of ropes and the creak of timber, dip his rag in the brine, and scrub away what the sea allows him to wash. Out here there is no pretense of marble tubs or perfumed soaps. There is only salt and wind and the hush of waves against the hull. And in this harsh cleansing, a sailor finds enough to hold back the filth for one more day, beneath sails that billow like great white prayers stitched tight to the restless breath of the sea. In a damp northern village where the soot from a nearby foundry settles like fine ash over rooftops and hedges, the old stone schoolhouse perches on a slope above a row of terraced cottages. Its windows rattle with every gust, its floors creak with every bootstep, and the smell inside is a stubborn mixture of chalk dust, damp coats, and ink that stains young fingertips black by mid-morning. Here, in a single room, warmed by an iron stove that never quite chases away the chill, 40-odd children sit bent over slates and battered primers. Their cheeks are chapped from cold winds that slip through cracks in the walls, and their hair carries the faint, sour tang of homes where coal fires do battle with drafty door frames and thin blankets. Miss Ellen Potts stands at the front, a straight-backed figure in a plain black dress, her hair pinned in a bun so severe it pulls the corners of her eyes tight. She watches each grubby hand grip a slate pencil, each small head bob over sums and sentences. To Miss Potts, cleanliness is no small lesson. She believes that neat hands and scrubbed faces speak as loudly as recited grammar. Yet she knows the truth behind every collar buttoned tight against tiny throats. She knows that for most of these children, a full bath is a rare thing, saved for Saturday nights when mothers haul steaming kettles to fill tin tubs set before the hearth. Soap is precious and spread thin, used first for laundry, second for skin. On Friday afternoons, when lessons end and slates are stacked away, Miss Potts inspects each child before sending them home. She lifts chins with a gentle but unyielding finger, checking for grime behind ears, nails blackened by coal dust or ink. Some flinch, ashamed. Some stand stiff and proud, trusting the morning's quick scrub at the washstand to pass muster. One boy, Tommy Lyle, stands at the end of the line, freckled nose held high. His hair, a bramble of cowlicks, still glistens at the tips where his mother licked her hand to flatten it before shooing him out the door. His collar is frayed, but mostly white, and his knees, peeking beneath patched trousers, are cleaner than they were last week. Miss Potts nods him through with a faint smile. She remembers his mother's eyes when they passed in the lane, her arms wrapped tight around a basket of laundry, her knuckles raw from scrubbing at a cracked stone sink. She knows that a clean collar is more than soap. It is pride, discipline, hope that the world might treat the boy better than it treated his father, who left for the ironworks and never came home again. When Saturday comes, the village lanes fill with the quiet labor of families trying to wash away a week's worth of factory grime and schoolhouse chalk. Tin tubs clatter onto hearthstones, kettles hiss and bubble, and children wait their turn by the flicker of firelight. Small feet tap against flagstones as older sisters comb knits from tangled hair, soap stinging small scratches on thin shins. Tommy sits on a low stool near the hearth, shirt off, knees pulled to his chest. His mother kneels behind him, hair pinned back, sleeves rolled to her elbows. She dips a rag into the tub, lifts it dripping and warm, and wipes the sweat and ink from his back. The soap is harsh, homemade from leftover tallow boiled with lye, but the steam rising from the tub is kind, wrapping mother and son in a hush of warmth that the draft beneath the door cannot quite steal away. Outside the window, the village breathes coal smoke into the twilight. The ironworks send up sparks that drift like angry fireflies over rooftops dusted gray. But inside this small cottage, the soap's sharp scent fights back. A small rebellion that says we will not surrender completely to the grime. Tommy squirms as his mother works behind his ears, muttering that next week she'll not hear a word from Miss Potts about filthy napes and inky fingernails. He giggles, half protest, half delight. For a moment, the harsh clamor of the mill feels far away, as though the only world that matters is this one. The pop and hiss of the hearth, the splash of water, the soft slap of a clean rag against a boy's warm skin. When his turn is done, Tommy wraps in a rough towel stitched from an old flour sack. His mother empties the gray water into the yard, steam swirling into the night air where it meets the iron chill. She hangs the rag to dry on the same hook that holds her apron, already stiffening with soap residue and tomorrow's chores. Sunday morning, Tommy will stand again in Miss Potts's line, face scrubbed, hair flattened with damp fingers. His collar may still be frayed, but behind his ears will gleam pale as any lord's child. Proof that in this village of roaring furnaces and drifting soot, the battle against dirt is fought not just with soap, but with fierce, stubborn love. In the schoolhouse on the hill, Miss Potts will lift his chin once more, and perhaps her hand will pause a heartbeat longer in praise for the small victory tucked beneath a patched collar and a mother's careful scrub. Chalk dust and coal soot will come again always, but for one day at least, a boy may carry the clean promise of a Saturday wash like a secret shield against the grime of the world waiting beyond the schoolhouse door. Where the coach road cuts through the low hills between Manchester and York, a sturdy stone inn stands at the crossroads like a guardian for weary travelers. Its sign, the crown and lantern, creaks in the wind, promising rest and a warm hearth to those who stumble from rattling carriages, boots thick with road mud, and faces drawn from days in cramped seats. Inside, the taproom hums with the talk of farmers and drovers, their boots stamping out the chill by the great fireplace. But upstairs, behind a heavy oak door that sticks in its swollen frame, Ellen Brocklehurst works in quieter company, the company of bedsheets, basins, and steam. Ellen is the innkeeper's wife, though most who pass through the Crown and Lantern know her simply as Mistress Brocklehurst, keeper of the keys and guardian of clean sheets. To some, she is invisible, a shadow that appears only when linen must be changed and slop jars must be emptied. But to the travelers who sink into beds that smell faintly of lavender and starch, she is the unseen promise that sleep will not cling with the stale breath of the last soul who laid their head on that pillow. Each morning begins the same, a knock at each chamber door, her soft voice asking if the guest is away or stirring. When the room's empty, Ellen sets to work. Her hands are broad and pale from years plunged in scalding water, wrists strong enough to wring a damp sheet until the water runs clear. She gathers soiled linens, sweat-slicked pillowcases, under blankets heavy with the restless heat of strangers, and hauls them down the narrow stairs to the washroom at the back of the inn. There, a copper boiler squats above a hearth blackened with decades of work. She fills it bucket by bucket from the rain barrel outside, tipping water in until her arms burn. The fire crackles beneath, coaxed to a steady roar, its warmth pressing steam into the low ceiling until droplets gather and fall back like rain. Into the boiling water she drops each piece in turn, stirring with a wooden paddle almost as tall as she is. Soap is shaved in thin curls from a block of yellow tallow bought in bulk from a chandler in the city. Ellen knows how to ration it, adding just enough to loosen the sweat and road grime without wasting a crumb. She watches the bubbles swirl around the linen like tiny storms, her thoughts drifting to the guests above, the loud snorers and the secret weepers, the merchants who drink too much ale before bed, the coachmen who track mud up the stairs no matter how often she mops the hallway. When the boil is done, Ellen lifts the linen with iron tongs, her arms misted with hot droplets that leave tiny scalds along her wrists. Each piece is dragged through rinse water hauled fresh from the pump. Her daughter, Mary, barely 12, stands beside her with a tin bucket, fetching and carrying without complaint. Between them, they wring out each sheet, folding it over the mangle's rollers until the water drips away in rivulets that vanish through the cracks in the stone floor. Outside in the inn's small courtyard, a line of rope stretches between two posts hammered deep in the earth. Here the linen hangs in the weak sun, flapping in the breeze that carries the faint smell of horse dung from the stables and the sharper tang of coal smoke drifting from the taproom's chimney. Ellen pins each corner tight, watching the sheets billow like pale flags above the churned mud where travelers' boots have left their mark. At dusk, when the last sheet is dry, she gathers them back into her arms, pressing her face for a heartbeat into the clean cloth. Beneath the faint lavender scent she tucks into each fold, she can still trace the ghost of the road, the sweat, the stale breath, the restless twist of bodies caught between towns and errands. But they are clean enough now, fresh enough to promise the next guest that this bed, this pillow, holds no memory of the one who came before. In the hush of the inn's upstairs corridor, Ellen smooths each sheet tight across straw mattresses softened by years of careful mending. She fluffs pillows, shakes blankets, rubs a drop of lavender water along the headboards where weary brows may rest. She leaves the windows cracked just wide enough to let the night air steal away the day's last stale warmth. By the time the lanterns are lit and boots thump across the taproom's flagged floor, the beds stand waiting. White, crisp, quietly boasting of care that will never be spoken of by name. No guest asks how many buckets were hauled, how many burns sting her wrists when she kneels by the hearth. No one wonders how soap is rationed or water boiled again and again to chase the road's filth from the cloth. And Ellen does not mind. Her pride lives in these beds, in the clean promise that, for a single night, a merchant's dusty coat and a drover's cracked boots do not follow him beneath the blankets. In the morning, the cycle will begin again. Linen stripped, water hauled, the copper boiler rattling as steam curls beneath the low beams of her hidden kingdom. Outside the Crown and Lantern, wagons and coaches rattle on toward far-off cities where marble baths and perfumed soaps wait for the wealthy. But here, in the warmth of the washroom's hearth, Ellen's hands hold the line between the road's dirt and a night's small comfort. And for countless weary travelers who wake to a clean pillow, that quiet, unseen labor is the gentlest luxury they will never fully know. On a narrow lane tucked behind the bustling marketplace of Nottingham, a small shop squats beneath a leaning gable, its sign creaking in the wind. W. Arkwright, Chemist and Druggist. Behind its dusty panes glimmer rows of glass bottles and stoppered jars, their labels curling with age. Powders and oils, dried herbs, and pungent ointments that promise to soothe coughs, ease fevers, and ward off the creeping illnesses that thrive wherever filth finds a foothold. Inside, the air is sharp with the tang of camphor and vinegar, softened by the sweet, ghostly trace of lavender sachets tucked between jars to fight the damp. Behind the narrow counter stands Walter Arkwright himself, sleeves rolled to the elbow, spectacles perched on the bridge of his nose, as he weighs a packet of salicylic powder for an old widow whose joints complain of every cold draught. Walter is a man of order and habit, his mind a careful ledger of weights, measures, and half-forgotten folk cures learned from an uncle who trained in the city before him. But more than any tonic or cordial, he knows the worth of plain soap and clean water in a city whose alleys run slick with runoff and whose drains clog easily with the cast-offs of too many people pressed too close together. He keeps a wide block of carbolic soap behind the counter, a rarity in smaller villages where homemade lye cakes do most of the work. Mothers come shyly, coins pressed tight in hand, asking for a slice to guard against the fever that stalks their children's narrow beds. Walter cuts the bar carefully, wraps each piece in stiff brown paper, and presses upon them simple instructions. Boil the rag, scrub the hands, keep the pump clean. Not all listen, of course. Old habits die hard when water must be fetched by the bucket from public pumps shared by half the street. Soap costs money that could buy bread, and many prefer the old belief that a strong stomach can outwit the stink of standing gutters and overflowing privies. Yet, in the back room, where Walter keeps his private bench and small iron stove, he experiments still. Brewing tinctures of eucalyptus for the air, mixing pennyroyal and vinegar to chase lice from blankets, blending gentle salves for scalded skin raw from harsh soap and winter's bite. Late one evening, the bell over the door rings sharp in the hush of closing time. A young mother stands in the doorway, shawl pulled tight, a child hidden against her skirts. Her eyes flick to the shelves behind Walter, then down to her boy, a frail thing with pale lips and a thin sheen of sweat at his brow. She speaks softly of fever, of a cough that rattles in the dark, of neighbors whispering about the sickness that claimed 3 down the lane just last week. Walter listens, nodding. He fetches a dark bottle from a high shelf, a cordial of licorice and laudanum, enough to ease the worst of the child's cough and help him sleep through the rasping night. But before he hands it over, he does as he always does. He reaches for the carbolic block and cuts a piece, wraps it neatly, presses it into the mother's palm alongside the bottle. "Boil your linens," he says, voice low but firm. "Wipe his face with clean cloths. Wash your hands, always, before you feed him, before you touch his mouth. And scrub under your nails, no matter how tired you are." She nods, half understanding, half too weary to argue. The coin she leaves on the counter is hardly enough for both the cordial and the soap, but Walter lets it pass. Better the boy breathe easier, better the gutter's filth stay outside their door if it can. When they go, he watches her disappear into the drifting dusk, where the street lamps hiss and spit against the gathering damp. He knows the limits of his little shop, that no tincture can fully hold back the tide of sickness that seeps through the cracks of a city that grows faster than its drains and pumps can keep clean. But he believes still in small defenses. Soap, scalding water, boiling rags and kettles that have known as much sorrow as soup. He wipes the counter with a vinegar rag, snuffs the lamp above the till, and turns the key in the shop's swollen door. In the back room, he sets his mortar and pestle aside, washes his hands in a basin of warm water, scrubs beneath his nails with a sliver of the same harsh soap he sells by the ounce. The sting in the cracked skin of his knuckles reminds him that cleanliness is never gentle work. Outside, the city groans into night, carts rumbling over cobbles, drunken laughter drifting from alehouses, stray dogs nosing through bins behind the butcher's shop. Walter locks the last shutter tight, steps into the cold with the faint smell of camphor clinging to his coat. His feet carry him home, past pools of lamplight that flicker on the slick stones, past the shadows that gather where the drains overflow. Tomorrow, mothers will come again, and fathers too, and children with sores along their arms from scratching at lice. He will sell them tinctures and ointments, penny powders for coughs, a knot of advice for stubborn rashes. But always, always, the same counsel slipped across the counter like a quiet prayer. Wash what you can, scrub what you must, fight the city's filth with water, soap, and stubbornness. In a world where soot drifts down like a second skin and sickness waits behind every cracked door, Walter Arkwright's shelves are lined not only with powders and glass, but with the small, bright hope that for a few pennies and a basin of warm water, a family might hold the darkness at bay a little longer. And rise, if not whole, then at least clean enough to greet another dawn. At the edge of St. Mary's churchyard, where the moss-covered stones lean like weary sentinels, Thomas Becket works with a spade and a quiet mind. He is the gravedigger, keeper of the earth's last embrace, a man whose boots are never quite free of clay and whose fingernails bear the stubborn line of dark soil no matter how often he scrubs. In the hush of dawn, before the mourners arrive in carriages draped in black crepe, Thomas finishes his work. The grave is neat. Sides squared, soil piled tidy at the edge. He leans on his spade for a moment, drawing a breath into lungs that taste faintly of wet loam and damp grass. He is a small man, stooped at the shoulders, with a fringe of hair that curls like gray smoke beneath a battered cap. Few notice him when they stand by the open grave with eyes lifted to the curate's solemn words. But Thomas notices them all. He knows the weight of grief pressed into a widow's hands as she clutches a handkerchief to her mouth, the stiff pride in a son's shoulders as he watches the coffin lowered into the clay. He knows, too, that when the last mourner departs and the soft shuffle of feet fades down the church path, the dirt remains for him to smooth and tamp, the stone to settle in its place among the others. By dusk, his work is done. He stows his tools in the small stone shed that leans against the lych gate. There, beside the rows of spades and worn ropes, stands a battered rain barrel perched on bricks to catch the runoff from the church roof. A tin basin sits beside it, an old cake of yellow soap balanced on its rim. It is no grand bath, no copper tub or steaming washhouse, but it is Thomas's small ritual. The line between the grave's damp promise and the warmth of his own hearth waiting just beyond the churchyard wall. He rolls up his sleeves, dips the basin full from the barrel. The water is cold, sharp enough to bite at the raw skin of his knuckles. He works the soap into a thin lather, scrubbing his hands until the dirt lifts in gray streams that swirl at the basin's bottom. He dips his forearms next, then splashes his face, the chill bracing, almost holy in the hush that settles over the graves as the sun slips behind the crooked steeple. A small lantern flickers on a hook by the shed door. Thomas sets it alight, its glow painting the damp stones gold. He rubs the soap beneath his fingernails with a short, stiff brush, the bristles worn to stubs from years of chasing graveyard clay from creases the earth wants to keep. He hums as he works, a low tune he does not remember learning, only that his father hummed it too, a lifetime ago when he first showed Thomas how to shape a grave with neat corners and gentle respect. He thinks of how the mourners never see this part, how they step away believing the earth swallows the dead without protest, how they never wonder who smooths the last mound, who whispers a soft word for the sake of the ones left behind. In this small wash, Thomas holds his own prayer, not written in any book, but carried in the swirl of cold water, the sharp scent of plain soap that chases the grave's chill from his wrists. When his hands are scrubbed pink and his sleeves rolled down once more, Thomas lifts the basin, tipping it away behind the shed where the grass grows thick in the damp shade. The used water seeps into the soil, earth to earth, dirt to dirt, even in this small thing. He sets the soap to dry on the rough ledge where his lantern waits each dusk, then pulls on his coat and lifts his cap from its hook. He leaves the graveyard by the lych gate, boots tapping the worn stones of the church path. Behind him, the graves lie settled for the night, their stories pressed beneath carved names and dates that catch the moonlight like quiet sighs. Ahead, the lane dips toward his cottage, where a small hearth waits, a kettle warming on the hook for tea that will steam in his cracked mug while the last chill seeps from his bones. Inside that cottage, he will wash again. A quick rinse at the scullery basin, warm if the fire is kind. Another soft lather of soap across his tired hands before he sits down to supper. It is not vanity that makes him clean away the grave's touch. It is respect. For the dead he leaves resting. For the living he will greet tomorrow. For the simple truth that a man should not carry the earth's cold breath to his table if he can help it. In the hush of his small room, the soap's faint scent will cling to his hands as he folds them over his belly, breath slowing beneath the soft tick of the mantel clock. Outside, the church bell will toll midnight, the graves at his back resting easy in the dark. And Thomas Becket, gravedigger and keeper of the clean line between clay and hearth, will close his eyes knowing that tomorrow's earth will wait for him. And so, too, will the cold basin, the battered soap, and the quiet wash that reminds him he is not yet part of the soil he tends so faithfully each day. In a squat brick terrace on the outskirts of Leeds, where the railway line hums like a restless vein and the factory chimneys breathe black threads into the sky, the Webb family gathers on Sunday evening for the final ritual of their week, the bath. It is no grand affair, no marble tub, no scented soap, only a battered copper tub hauled from the yard, set before the hearth where the coal fire fights back the creeping draft that rattles the window panes. Tonight, the father, Harold Webb, stands at the pump in the backyard, working the stiff handle with hands cracked from the textile mill's dry air. Water gushes into the bucket in shuddering spurts, each drop precious in a house where every shilling is measured against coal, bread, and boots for growing children. His breath ghosts in the evening chill, drifting over the row of turnip tops that cling stubbornly to the frost-bitten garden. Inside, his wife Edna kneels by the hearth, coaxing the fire into a cheerful blaze. A kettle hisses, its spout rattling against the grate. 2 more pots sit ready, lined up like soldiers waiting their turn to pour their warmth into the tub's dented belly. Around her feet circle their 3 children. William, all knees and elbows at 10. Lizzie, her hair tied back with a frayed ribbon. And baby James, chubby fists gripping the hem of Edna's apron as he totters on uncertain legs. When Harold carries the first bucket in, the heat from the hearth hits his cheeks, softening the rawness in his knuckles. He empties the water with care, watching it steam as it mixes with the kettle's bubbling promise. More trips follow, out to the pump, in again, until the tub is 2/3 full, and the water just warm enough to chase the week's grit from small shoulders and tired backs. William goes first, stripping off shirt and trousers with practiced quickness, eyes bright with the small thrill of warmth in a house where draughts crawl beneath doors. He lowers himself in with a hiss, goose flesh rising as the heat creeps up his bony knees. Edna kneels beside him, dipping a rag into a chipped enamel basin, soaping it with the last wedge of store-bought soap wrapped in a scrap of brown paper marked with the grocer's faint scrawl, "Pure household." She scrubs behind his ears, across the collarbone that juts like the edge of a shelf. William squeezes his eyes shut, racing as she ruffles the soap into his hair, fingers quick but gentle. Rivulets of gray trickle down his spine, chased by the rag and Edna's quiet hum of a hymn she half remembers from her own mother's wash day. Next comes Lizzie, skinny knees knocking the tin tub's rim as she slips in, giggling at the swirl of warm water left from her brother's rinse. She squeals when the soap finds the tender hollow behind her neck. Edna hushes her gently, a reminder that too much splashing will waste what warmth they have. The girl ducks her chin under Edna's rag, blinking through suds that sting her eyes, but leave her hair soft enough to braid before bed. Last is baby James. Harold lifts him in with a grunt, holding his squirming body steady as Edna dribbles water over his head. He squeals at the heat, at the bright shimmer of the hearth that dances across the tub's dented rim. She wipes him clean with small, sure strokes, mindful of the folds beneath his chin, the soft creases of knees and elbows where milk dribbles dry and dust finds a home. When the children are scrubbed pink and lifted out, Edna wraps them each in a faded towel, the edges patched with careful stitches. William rubs his hair dry with quick, impatient strokes, already eyeing the bread and dripping waiting on the table. Lizzie slips her feet into socks still warm from the fire's edge, while baby James gurgles, arms flapping as he is bundled tight and set in his cradle near the hearth's glow. Now it is Harold's turn. He lowers himself into the same water, still warm enough, still gray with the honest grime of children's play and factory dust, and lets Edna lift the rag to his shoulders. She scrubs gently, working the soap into the crook of his neck where cotton lint clings stubbornly. He closes his eyes, leaning forward so she can reach the nape of his hairline, the arch of his back that never quite loses the ache of bent hours at the loom. When he steps out, steam drifting from his broad shoulders, Edna pulls the tub aside and lowers herself last. The water is nearly tepid now, the soap thin as milk, but still she sinks in with a quiet sigh. Her own cloth strokes away the salt at her temples, the coal dust that hides along her hairline, the warmth of work that clings where the fire's heat never fully reaches. When she rises, the bath water is tipped into the yard, a swirl of soot and soap and the stubborn residue of a family's quiet fight against the city's endless grime. The tub is dried, the rag hung above the hearth to stiffen by morning. The kettle goes on once more, this time not for washing, but for tea, shared in chipped cups while the children drift to sleep in the loft above, their hair still smelling faintly of soap. Outside, the night hums with the rattle of a late train, the cough of a chimney belching its black breath into the starless dark. But within the Webb's small brick home, the air is softer, scented with coal smoke and clean skin, the fragile promise that for a few hours at least, they have washed away the city's grit and tomorrow's toil. In the hush of the hearth, Harold and Edna sit shoulder to shoulder, cups warm between their hands, the soap sliver resting in its dish by the sink. They do not speak of better days, of grand baths or copper taps. They may never know. For now, this battered tub, this humble rag, this soft warmth is enough. A small defiance against a world that coats every window ledge and heartbeat with the soot of its restless turning. Tomorrow, the grime will come again, drifting down the railway, sneaking beneath doors, settling into cuffs and collars and fingernails. But tonight, they are clean enough, together enough, ready enough to rise again and stand their ground against the grit of the age, armed with nothing more than soap, water, and the hush of Sunday's quiet reckoning.